Texas changed forever. What began as an ordinary Friday evening turned into one of the darkest chapters in the city's history, a tragedy that would echo across America and remain unsolved for more than 3 decades. The case, now widely known as the Yogurt Shop Murders, is one of the most haunting true crime mysteries in modern history. 4 teenage girls, full of life and promise, were brutally murdered inside a neighborhood frozen yogurt shop. The killings stunned the community, baffled investigators, and created an unsolved cold case that continues to raise questions about justice, memory, and the limits of forensic science. To understand why this story has gripped the world for over 30 years, you have to imagine Austin in the early 1990s. At that time, Austin was a growing but still relatively close-knit city, a place where parents felt comfortable letting their kids walk to the corner store or work evening shifts at local businesses. It was a city with a vibrant music culture, family-oriented neighborhoods, and a reputation for being safer than other major cities in Texas. In that atmosphere, a yogurt shop on West Anderson Lane was just another spot where friends met after school and teenagers earned a little extra cash. Nobody imagined it could become the setting for such unimaginable horror. The Yogurt Shop Murders are remembered not only for their brutality, but for their randomness. This was not a crime that fit into a neat box. It wasn't part of a gang war or a serial killer's spree. Instead, it was an act of senseless violence that seemed to have no motive strong enough to explain it. The sheer cruelty of the murders shocked both seasoned investigators and ordinary citizens. Parents who once trusted their community now feared for their children's safety. Teenagers whispered in fear about what had happened, realizing that the victims were girls just like them, students, sisters, friends. From the very beginning, the case was surrounded by chaos. Firefighters discovered the crime after extinguishing flames inside the shop, but the fire had destroyed and contaminated much of the physical evidence. Detectives faced a nearly impossible task, unraveling a crime scene that had been partly erased. The lack of solid evidence meant that rumors, speculation, and public pressure quickly filled the void. And with the media broadcasting every development, the story became bigger than Austin. It became a national obsession, a headline that refused to fade. Over time, the Austin Yogurt Shop Murders came to represent more than just a single crime. They became a cautionary tale about investigative errors, the fragility of confessions, and the desperate need for forensic breakthroughs. They also became a symbol of resilience, as the families of the victims refused to let the case be forgotten. For decades, they have fought to keep their daughters' names alive, pushing for new tests, new leads, and new attention. The Yogurt Shop Murders remain one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. The case still asks the same haunting questions. Who killed the 4 girls that December night in Austin, Texas? Why has justice remained out of reach for so long? And will science and persistence finally bring answers? December 6, 1991, started as an ordinary day in North Austin, Texas. At a small strip mall on West Anderson Lane, a frozen yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt prepared to close for the night. It was the kind of place families visited after dinner, and teenagers worked part-time shifts after school. But by midnight, that cheerful little shop would become the scene of one of the most infamous unsolved cold cases in American history, the Yogurt Shop Murders. That night, 4 girls were inside the shop. Jennifer Harbison, 17, and her best friend Eliza Thomas, 17, were working the closing shift. Jennifer's younger sister, Sarah Harbison, 15, and her friend Amy Ayers, 13, had stopped by to keep them company. The girls were like so many others in Austin, busy with school, friendships, and dreams for the future. No one could have imagined the horror that was about to unfold. Sometime before midnight, unknown attackers entered the yogurt shop. Exactly how events unfolded remains unclear, but what is known is chilling. The girls were bound and gagged, then shot execution style. Their lives ended in a matter of minutes, their futures stolen in an act of brutal violence. To conceal the crime, the killers set fire to the store, hoping flames would erase their presence, but instead, the fire exposed one of the darkest crimes in Texas history. Around midnight, firefighters responded to reports of smoke rising from the shop. At first, they thought it was a routine blaze, but once the flames were extinguished, the horrifying truth emerged. In the back of the store, they found the bodies of the 4 girls. The fire had blackened the walls, but the evidence of violence was unmistakable. Even seasoned investigators were shaken by the brutality. The news spread quickly through Austin. Parents clutched their children tighter. Teenagers who once felt safe working late-night jobs now looked over their shoulders. The idea that 4 girls could be murdered inside a public shop in a busy part of town was almost impossible to comprehend. The city that once prided itself on being welcoming and safe was suddenly gripped by fear. For detectives, the case was immediately daunting. The fire had destroyed much of the physical evidence, leaving only fragments to work with. Shell casings were recovered, but there were no fingerprints, no clear DNA results, and no eyewitnesses who saw the crime unfold. The scene was chaotic, compromised by smoke, flames, and water used to put out the blaze. From the start, investigators were playing catch-up. The yogurt shop murders made headlines across Texas, and soon across the nation. News outlets called it one of the worst crimes in Austin's history. Families of the victims appeared on television, pleading for justice and answers. Candlelight vigils filled with grief-stricken neighbors showed how deeply the tragedy had shaken the community. It wasn't just about 4 victims. It was about a city that suddenly realized safety could vanish in a single night. What happened inside that yogurt shop on December 6, 1991, remains one of the most disturbing mysteries in American true crime history. The brutality, the apparent randomness, and the lack of immediate answers turned this case into a puzzle that has haunted investigators for more than 3 decades. In the days after the yogurt shop murders, Austin police found themselves under extraordinary pressure. The public was terrified, the media demanded answers, and the families of the 4 victims wanted justice. But with a crime scene badly damaged by fire, investigators had little solid evidence to work with. That pressure to solve the case quickly would lead to one of the most controversial chapters in Texas true crime history, a series of arrests and convictions that many now see as tragic examples of wrongful prosecution. Throughout the 1990s, detectives followed every lead they could find. Hundreds of people were interviewed, from witnesses who claimed to see suspicious men near the yogurt shop to acquaintances of the victims. Despite the massive investigation, years passed with no breakthrough. Frustration grew, and the community began to question whether the killers would ever be caught. By the late 1990s, nearly 8 years after the murders, the police announced they had suspects. 4 young men from Austin: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. Investigators believed they finally had the answers the public was demanding. But their case relied heavily on confessions obtained during long, intense interrogations. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were questioned for hours, sometimes late into the night. Eventually, both gave statements admitting involvement and implicating the others. These confessions became the backbone of the prosecution. In 1999, the men were brought to trial, and both Springsteen and Scott were convicted. Springsteen received a death sentence, while Scott was sentenced to life in prison. To many, it seemed like justice had at last been delivered in the Austin yogurt shop murders. But almost immediately, doubts emerged. The confessions were riddled with contradictions. Springsteen and Scott described details of the crime differently: how the girls were tied up, how the fire started, even the number of attackers. Some details directly conflicted with the physical evidence. Defense attorneys argued that the interrogations were coercive, pointing out that police fed information to the suspects and pressured them into agreeing. Over time, these doubts grew impossible to ignore. In the mid-2000s, appeals courts reviewed the cases and raised serious concerns. At the same time, forensic science had advanced. DNA evidence collected from the crime scene was tested using more sophisticated methods. The results were stunning. The male DNA found did not match Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, or Wellborn. This discovery undermined the entire case against them. By 2009, after years behind bars, both Springsteen and Scott were released. Their convictions were overturned, and the charges were dismissed. What had once been celebrated as a major victory for Austin law enforcement collapsed into embarrassment. The city now faced the painful reality that not only had the real killers escaped justice, but innocent men had been imprisoned for years. For the families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, the collapse of the convictions was devastating. They had believed the case was resolved, only to be thrust back into uncertainty. For the Austin Police Department, The episode damaged public trust and raised questions about tunnel vision and investigations. The wrongful convictions left the case back at square one. 4 girls were still gone, their killers were still free, and the yogurt shop murders remained what they had been since that night in 1991, an unsolved cold case that continues to haunt Austin, Texas, and the world of true crime. By the time Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were released from prison in 2009, the yogurt shop murders had already become a textbook example of the dangers of relying on coerced confessions. But if the courts and the legal system had failed to deliver justice, science was beginning to offer new hope. The discovery and testing of DNA evidence became the most important turning point in the case. Proof that the killers had left behind biological traces, even if their identities remained hidden. When the crime occurred in 1991, DNA analysis was still in its infancy. Forensic labs could only process large, intact samples, and the process was slow and costly. Investigators collected evidence from the yogurt shop, but the fire and water damage made much of it unusable. For years, the technology simply wasn't advanced enough to provide clear answers. That began to change in the late 1990s and early 2000s. New methods such as YSTR testing allowed forensic scientists to isolate male DNA from mixed samples. When crime scene evidence from the yogurt shop was re-examined using these methods, investigators made a shocking discovery: a male DNA profile that did not match any of the 4 men who had been accused. This finding shattered the prosecution's case against Springsteen and Scott, proving that the killers were still unidentified. It also raised new questions about how many people had actually been involved. If DNA from an unknown male was present, it meant at least one suspect had never even been on the radar. The revelation was both a breakthrough and a bitter setback. While it confirmed the wrongful convictions, it also underscored how far investigators still had to go. In the years that followed, this unidentified DNA profile became the cornerstone of the investigation. Detectives compared it against national databases, hoping for a match. Thousands of profiles were checked, but the killer's DNA never connected to anyone in the system. The profile was like a ghost, proof of the killer's existence, but no way to name him. As forensic technology advanced further, new possibilities emerged. By the late 2010s, genetic genealogy began changing the landscape of cold case investigations. This technique, which helped capture the Golden State Killer, uses consumer DNA databases to identify distant relatives of suspects. For many following the yogurt shop murders, it seemed like only a matter of time before this method might unlock the mystery. Still, as of today, no definitive match has been made. The DNA evidence remains the strongest lead, but it has not yet delivered justice. For the victims' families, this reality is deeply frustrating. They know the killer's genetic fingerprint exists, preserved in a database, waiting for the right connection. Every year that passes without a match is another year of unanswered questions. The persistence of the DNA mystery keeps the case alive in the public eye. It is a reminder that even decades later, unsolved cold cases can be cracked with science. But until the unknown male is identified, the yogurt shop murders remain a chilling reminder of how elusive justice can be, even when the evidence is literally in hand.
More than 3 decades have passed since the night of December 6, 1991, yet the yogurt shop murders still grip the public imagination. The case is not just another crime in Austin, Texas. It has become a lasting symbol of tragedy, investigative failure, and the relentless hope that someday the truth will come to light. Over the years, this case has resurfaced in waves, fueled by advances in forensic science, media coverage, and the growing global interest in true crime stories. Each time it returns to public attention, new eyes and new energy are brought to the search for answers. What keeps the yogurt shop murders alive in public memory is partly the brutality of the crime, but also the age of the victims. Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy were teenagers, with their whole lives ahead of them. Their innocence, combined with the randomness of the attack, still shocks people even decades later. When the story is retold on podcasts, news specials, or online platforms, listeners and viewers often find themselves deeply moved, imagining how easily the victims could have been their own daughters, sisters, or friends. That emotional connection has given the case a staying power that few other unsolved cold cases achieve. Another reason the yogurt shop murders continue to attract attention is the sheer mystery that surrounds them. Despite years of investigation, wrongful convictions, and the eventual discovery of unknown DNA, the case remains without a clear suspect. The contradictions, unanswered questions, and frustrating dead ends have turned this case into a puzzle that true crime communities revisit again and again. Online forums analyze every detail, from the confessions to the crime scene evidence, while amateur sleuths debate theories about who could have been responsible. For law enforcement, the constant public attention is both a challenge and an opportunity. The Austin Police Department still considers the yogurt shop murders an active investigation. Detectives have said that every new tip is taken seriously, no matter how small. In fact, the case has generated thousands of leads over the years, many of which come from members of the public who are reminded of the crime when it resurfaces in the media. While most of these tips lead nowhere, some have provided fresh angles for investigators to pursue. The rise of DNA technology has also fueled renewed interest. Every time a new breakthrough in forensic science is announced, whether it's genetic genealogy, familial DNA searching, or advanced database matching, the yogurt shop murders are often mentioned as a case that could benefit. This keeps the story alive in headlines and ensures that the victims are not forgotten. Each development brings renewed hope that the unknown male DNA profile may one day connect to a name. For the families of the victims, the ongoing public interest has been both painful and comforting. Painful because every new wave of attention reopens wounds and reminds them of what they lost. Comforting because it proves their daughters are not forgotten and their fight for justice continues to resonate with strangers around the world. The yogurt shop murders remain one of America's most infamous true crime mysteries. Despite the decades, despite the setbacks, and despite the unanswered questions, the case continues to captivate new generations of listeners and viewers. And as long as people keep remembering, there remains hope that the killers will one day be found.
The yogurt shop murders are more than just an unsolved crime. They are a wound in the heart of Austin, Texas, and a lasting reminder of how fragile justice can be. More than 3 decades after the night of December 6, 1991, the case remains one of the most haunting mysteries in American true crime history. For the families of Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, the pain has never faded. Their daughters were stolen from them in a single night, and every passing year without answers deepens the weight of grief. Yet their determination to seek justice has never wavered. The impact of the case extends far beyond the victims' families. For Austin, a city that once prided itself on its sense of safety, the murders were a wake-up call. Parents who once allowed their children to work evening shifts or gather with friends late at night became more cautious. The city realized that even familiar places, a yogurt shop and a busy strip mall, could become the scene of unthinkable violence. In many ways, the case reshaped how the community viewed safety and trust. The legacy of the investigation is equally complex. The wrongful convictions of Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott highlighted the dangers of coerced confessions and the devastating consequences of tunnel vision in police work. These missteps serve as a cautionary tale for law enforcement agencies nationwide. They show how the urgency to provide closure can sometimes lead investigators down the wrong path, with innocent people paying the price. For criminal justice reform advocates, the yogurt shop murders are often cited as a case study in why careful, evidence-based investigation is critical. On the other hand, the case also underscores the power of science. Advances in DNA evidence transformed the yogurt shop murders from a case built on shaky testimony into a modern investigation driven by hard science. The discovery of the unidentified male DNA profile proved that the wrong men had been convicted and offered the best hope of one day finding the real killers. Though the match has yet to come, the existence of that DNA keeps the case alive and gives investigators a concrete path forward. For the wider true crime community, the yogurt shop murders have become a story of resilience and memory. Countless podcasts, articles, and documentaries revisit the case, ensuring that the victims are never forgotten. Each retelling draws new attention, sparks new discussions, and reminds the world that justice is still waiting. In the era of global communication, this attention matters, because sometimes It only takes one new tip, one new connection, or one technological breakthrough to solve a case. The conclusion of the yogurt shop murders has yet to be written.